Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and well, this is the Shanling M6 Ultra. So this year so far, I've reviewed a handful of Android digital audio players, and Android audio players, they promise a lot of customization, but in the past they've come with a handful of different trade-offs. Now, fortunately, this year they're starting to get pretty good. They're solving a lot of those Android problems, and similarly, the Shanling M6 Ultra is coming in hot with a handful of features that, at least on paper, make this a pretty good Android audio player. So, for starters, they've got the Snapdragon 660 processor, which in phone terms is no, it's not state-of-the-art in terms of technology, but when it comes to audio players, it's actually a really good chipset. We've had that in the past. You also have got Android 10 on this, which again, not the newest, but it's newer than a lot of the older Android devices. And then you've also got 3.5 gigabytes of RAM. On top of those specs, it's got some audio chops. It's got over 700 milliwatts of power, and we'll talk about if that's necessary or not, but that's a ton. And it's also using AKM's state-of-the-art DAC. You might remember AKM, the DAC manufacturer. They had a factory fire a couple of years ago. They're out with a new chipset, and the Shanling M6 Ultra is using it. In fact, not only are they using one of the AKM DACs, not only are they using two of the AKM DACs, this thing has actually got 4 DACs in it. Now, does that matter? I don't know. The catch with all that stuff with the M6 Ultra is going to be the price. This player is coming in at a little over $900. And so for the past month, I've been living with the M6 Ultra, trying to figure out, is it worth the premium? How does it compare to some other digital audio players? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Like all my other reviews, this is a live stream. If you're here now live, you have any questions about the M6 Ultra, anything else we talk about, please leave it in the live chat at the end of the review. We'll stick around and have some conversation. Otherwise, a quick shout out to Shanling for sending this in for review. If you want to check it out, I do have a link to Shanling in the description down below. But with that out of the way, let's dive to the table and start talking about the review on this audio player. And just to kind of give you a frame of what this review is going to be like, because it might be a little bit long. We're going to talk about what comes inside the box. We're going to talk about the build quality, the physical stuff, talk about all the buttons, the input output. Then we'll start talking about the functionality, and of course we're going to talk about the sound, and then I'll bring in some other DAPs for direct head-to-head comparison. Okay, like I said, let's start with what's in the box. So this is the packaging that you get with the M6 Ultra. Pretty nice packaging, although I'll be honest, what you get inside the packaging is a little on the light side. So you do get, well, okay, they include a couple of plastic screen covers, which is pretty nice, I guess. I'm not a big fan of plastic screen covers in general, but when you are getting a DAP like this, it might be hard to find screen protectors at all, so it's nice that they include something. That said, there was actually one that was pre-installed as well, so 3 screen protectors in total. I actually took it off because I live dangerously like that, and I think that it just feels much nicer to be touching the glass screen. On top of that, you get a cloth covered USB cable. It is USB-A to USB-C because, yes, unsurprisingly, the Shanling M6 Ultra charges via USB-C. And then you get the audio player itself. You might have noticed I didn't say that you get a case, although I have a case over here. Unfortunately, and I find this especially unfortunate given the price, they don't include a case. They do sell this case, and it's not that expensive. It's $36, and I will say it's actually a really nice case. One of my favorite DAP cases out there because, as you can see, it doesn't cover up the buttons. Like, it leaves place for the buttons to poke through, but otherwise looks handsome and covers the vital bits of the DAP. So I really like the case, but I'm a little bit disappointed that it's not included inside the box. Again, $36, you're already paying $900. Meh, maybe it's not a big jump, but you're already paying $900. So why are they charging you for that? Otherwise, yeah, let's just dive into the DAP itself and start talking about the physical stuff, the build quality of materials and stuff, and then we'll get into the buttons and all that good stuff. So first off, up front, I will say that this is a fairly large audio player. I don't know if this gives you a sense of how big it is next to my hand, but here it is next to an iPhone mini, which, okay, it looks a little bit smaller than an iPhone mini until, of course, you look at it from the side and you realize that it is a chunky DAP. You know, it's roughly the same size as the File M11 Plus, which I described as a Chungus audio player, but I will say that the M6 actually comes across a little bit smaller in the hand, even though like dimensionally it's not too different. And I think a lot of it has to do with just like these little divots in the side that make it fit in the hand a little bit better. I actually, despite this being a little bit on the chonky side and a little bit large, I actually don't mind the size of this thing at all, really. And then as you would expect for the price, it's got really nice materials all around the edge. You've got aluminum, of course, and this player that I've got here is in green, which I think is pretty handsome personally. But if you're not into the green look, they do also sell a black version of it, which also looks pretty handsome. And then of course you've got an all-screen front and what I think is an all glass front, and what I think is also an all glass back. Although, as you can tell here, it's somewhat of a frosted finish, which I actually think is a good choice because a lot of these digital audio players will have a glass back and it feels premium, yes, but it just ends up being kind of slick and slippery in the hands, where this matte finish, it's a subtle thing, but it makes a big difference, and I really have no issues with this thing feeling insecure in my hands or otherwise sliding around on my couch. Now, that said, I do still think it looks better and works better inside the case. In fact, I'll drop it in that case for you real quickly just so you can see. I like it better in the case, but it's an audio player that doesn't require the case for good handling the way that, I don't know, some of those big chonky file ones do, if I'm honest. And then I guess the last thing I'll talk about as I'm talking about the feel of this player, and this is a little bit outside of the materials, but this player actually gets a little bit warm as you're listening to it, especially if you're listening to it over a balance connector. It'll get pretty warm to the touch, not like hot or scalding or anything like that, but it just gets a little bit warm, keeps you cozy maybe. There you go. It could be a plus, could be a minus, depending on your situation. Okay, so that's the materials. Let's talk now about the button configuration, which is nice and simple on this, and I like it. So over here on, I'll call it the right side, or maybe it's its left side, but we'll call it the right side. There's really only one control, and it's this volume dial. And I'll say, I think it's nice to have a volume dial. Like, the alternative is to have buttons, and I like having knobs in general. Although, personally, I prefer analog knobs. This is a digital knob, and you do get a full 100 units of volume setting, and I think it's actually pretty good. You get good volume control with this. Another thing to call out about this knob is that it's, as you can see, it's a little bit on the shallow side. It doesn't stick up much, and I think that's actually a good thing because as I pocket this player, I have not had any issues with the volume being adjusted by my pocket, which is a thing you don't really want to happen with a digital audio player. So I think that's good. The other thing worth calling out about this button is that it doubles as a power button. So if I click it, the screen turns on and off. But yeah, that's that side of the player. And then over here on the other side, the left side, you've got your basic audio playback. You've got play button, track, previous track, and that's next track. And that's it. It's nice and simple. The one thing I guess I'll quibble about over here is I do wish that the center button, the play button, maybe had like a little bit of a nubbin on it or something like that. So it was a little easier to, by feel, know that I'm on the right button. But I don't know. There's only 3 buttons over there. It's hard to get lost. To be honest, it wasn't a big deal for me. But if I'm nitpicking, it would be nice to have a nubbin. Could always use a nubbin. Anything else worth talking about there? I don't think so. So let's talk about sort of the input and output, the I/O on this device. Like I mentioned, here on the bottom, you've got USB-C for charging. And then you might notice what's not on the bottom, and that's audio jacks. And that's because the audio jacks on the M6 Ultra, they've actually placed on the top of the device. Now, I personally am not a big fan of this, but I do recognize that there are people out there who prefer having audio jacks on top of their players. So it's nice that you have your choice, I suppose, but for me, I much prefer having my audio jacks on the bottom. Hold on, let me grab a sip of tea. And that's just because I like to be able to pocket the device and have the cables coming out of the bottom with this thing sort of upside down in my pocket. I don't know. Is it a big deal? I don't know. It is the sort of thing that annoys me a little bit, but I'll get over it. One thing you might have also noticed is that up here you have 2 audio jacks. You've got 3.5 millimeter audio jack for your single-ended connector, and then you've also got a balanced connector in 4.4 millimeter. What's not here is a 2.5 millimeter connector, which a lot of other DAPs are having. They have all 3 of them. Personally, I don't really miss it because, well, for starters, I pretty much only use 3.5 millimeter. I'll pull out balanced every once in a while, but for the most part, I'm a 3.5 guy, so I'm fine with that. And then if I am using balanced, I prefer 4.4. It feels like 2.5 is a bit of an anachronism at this point, but I don't know. If you were looking for it, unfortunately, it's not there. The last thing I'll talk about here on the I/O side is that there is a memory card slot down here at the bottom, as you can see. Now, there's a couple things that are a little bit annoying to me about this memory card slot. And one is that it's got a door on the top of it, which I don't think it needs. But and frankly, the door is a little bit difficult to get open. My fingernails are a little bit longer than they typically are right now, so I can probably get it open, but it's pretty difficult to pop this thing open. There we go. And then the other thing is that even though once I've got it open, getting the memory card out, I need a tool for it. Like, it's there, I shouldn't need a tool. Again, if you've got maybe longer fingernails than me, you won't need a tool, but I don't know, it just seems like it's overly difficult to get the memory card out of this thing. Depending on how you use this Android device, if you're taking the memory card out to put music onto it, that can be a pain in the butt. But if you're not doing that, if you've got your music syncing over Wi-Fi like I typically do, it's not such a big deal, but it's definitely a thing that's worth talking about. So overall, I think it is really quite nice hardware. Really pretty handsome. I didn't even talk about how handsome this thing is. I love the way this thing looks. But my main quibbles really would be the headphone jacks being on the top, and it is a little bit large overall, but generally pretty happy with the build. Okay, so that's the build stuff. Let's now talk about the functionality on the M6 Ultra. And there's going to be a lot to talk about. For starters, I'll just mention a little bit, or elaborate a little bit on what we talked about in the intro. This is using Android 10.0 or 10, which is not the newest Android, but it's pretty new. And I have not found any applications out there that I want to use that are not compatible with it. So I'm pretty happy with that, especially given some other DAPs out there are using older versions of Android. Android 10 is nice to see. There's also a Snapdragon 660 processor in here, which, again, I mentioned in the intro. I'll elaborate on that, what that means. A lot of these Android DAPs that I've tried in the past, like, they're good for playing music locally, but a lot of the reason people want these Android players is that they can use streaming apps. You want to connect to Apple Music, Amazon Music, YouTube Music, Spotify, etc. And on slower processors, it's doable, but it's kind of chunky, and I don't know. You pay a lot of money for a DAP and it's not the best experience. With the Snapdragon 660 that you get here in the Shanling, I think it's actually a pretty good experience. Again, it's still not going to be quite as fast. Let me go ahead and launch, let's say, YouTube Music, and this will be from a fresh launch. So you can see how quick it is to load, and that's pretty stinking good. Again, it's not going to be the absolute fastest experience, but I really have no complaints with that level of performance. Again, 3.5 gigabytes of RAM, which is, I don't want to say it's the best out there on a DAP, but it's the best that I have. So really no complaints about that. And again, like, not all Android DAPs are good with streaming apps. I would say the Shanling M6 Ultra is exemplary. Okay, let's stop talking about streaming apps and now start talking about Shanling's stock music app, which, I'll be honest, I think their stock music app is kind of ass. So you might notice I'm not using, this is Power Amp. I'm not using their stock app. Let's launch their stock app so you can get a sense for it. Yeah, okay, maybe ass is a bit much, but it's got a couple of problems. And in fact, I'll just stay up front. Like, the biggest problem that I have with this, that to me is a disqualifier of the stock Shanling app, is it does not support gapless playback, okay? And as well, there's like a fade in on every track that you play. And it's about 50 milliseconds, which, if you don't know milliseconds, that's pretty short, but it's noticeable. And that just means that listening to albums, as an album listener, which I am, it's a really unappealing way to listen to albums. Having audible gaps in between tracks and then having each track slightly cut off at the beginning with a fade in. It's just completely unnecessary. Again, for an album listener like me, I think this stock app is just not usable. And maybe that's harsh, but there it is. There are some other small quibbles, so if you're not bothered by that stuff, there are still some other small quibbles I'll bring up. For starters, all right, let's see. No, that was not what I tapped on. The artists. Again, small thing maybe, but a thing that kind of annoys me, and I've gotten used to this on other players, but you can see that all artists that start with the word "the" get alphabetized under the letter T. right? So the Cure, the Knife, the Proto-Men. Why are they all down here and not up, the Cure should be under C. Or why is the Cure under the Knife? I don't even know what that's about. That's bizarre. So yeah, that's maybe a small quibble, but it's a thing that annoys me. I think a more significant quibble though for me is that there's no way to play all of the albums, right? So the Cure, I have a few different albums by the Cure, and a lot of times what I like to do with my music is listen to one artist and listen to all of their albums sequentially. Unfortunately, there's no way to do that here on this player. You can see I can tap into any album and listen to that album sequentially, or I can go up here and see all tracks by this artist, and I can play them in alphabetical order, but I want to listen to each album one after the other, and you can see that the order here is completely mixed up. So there's no way to do that. And again, that's somewhat of a common fault, unfortunately, with a lot of these digital audio player stock apps, and unfortunately here with the Shanling, it is also an issue here. Let's see, some other smaller issues, like the album arts don't load until I lift my finger off the screen. You see as like I'm scrolling it, I lift my finger, then the album's arts load. That just becomes an issue because a lot of the times I navigate this menu, this list, visually, right? I'm scrolling it so fast a lot of the times with other apps that I'm not really looking at the names. I'm just looking at the colors from the album arts. And unfortunately, it's not really a valid way of perusing files on this. Let's see it as an example of what I like, right? Here's Power Amp, and here's how Power Amp does it, right? I can just really quickly swipe through and visually identify the artists that I'm looking for. So you can, of course, use Power Amp. So there is an option out there, but I think it's worth quibbling here about the Shanling app. Anything else worth? Okay, this is kind of a small thing, but let's see if I can even explain why this bothers me. If I close out this app, all right, and then I go back into the Shanling app, it's going to bring me back to where I left off. And that's actually a setting that I turned on because I wanted it to do that. Otherwise, what it was doing is every time I would launch the app, it would take me back here to the home screen. What's still kind of deficient about this, oh man, all right, let's see. How do I even get back? Nope, please. Okay, there we go. What's still kind of deficient about this, right, is and this is just a thing I find myself getting into a lot of the times, is I close the app, I come back to it, and I hit the back button, because what I really want to do is I want to go to the track list for this album, which is what I would expect the back button to do. But unfortunately, the back button just closes the app. Well, it didn't in that case. Okay, I just was revealed to be full of crap. No, it's when it launches from a full launch, right? So I hit back. It's going to go back to the home screen. Basically, it's, I don't know, maybe a small quibble, but I'm here to make small quibbles. Again, I really just, and because of those things, did not use the stock app very much. Instead, I used Power Amp. Now, okay, I was actually going to mention a couple of things that I thought were actually pretty decent about the Shanling app before we steer away from it entirely. For starters, I think it's decently handsome. There are some of these other stock apps out there, and I'll say that Hibby's Mango app is like probably my least favorite in terms of aesthetics. I think the Shanling app actually looks pretty good. The other thing that I will call out is that there is a 10-band equalizer in here. Not a thing I use a ton, but if you're looking for an equalizer, it's in there. There you go, your 10 bands. But yeah, that's about as much positive as I can say about that app. All right, let's see. Still talking about functionality, I wanted to talk about some things related to Android. So it is Android, right? You don't have to use the stock app. A lot of the Android benefits, the reason why people like me want to use Android app is not for the streaming apps, because I'm not a big streamer, but I do like the customization of Android. Unfortunately, there's a couple of software decisions that they made here with this player that make it not so customizable. The big thing, and this will be again, maybe another difficult thing to explain, but these buttons down here, these navigation buttons with the home button, the, what do you call this? The app switcher button and the back button, they appear to be fake buttons. Like Shanling's made their own version of these buttons, and they've kind of overridden some of the stock functionality of these buttons. The main thing is like this home button, okay? For starters, if I double tap the home button, is that how it works? Or like, I don't even know. Like I've accidentally put this thing to sleep. There you go. By double tapping the home button. That's just a weird functionality. I've never expected that of an Android home button, but their custom home button does that. small thing. The bigger issues that I have with this home button, however, is that this player is effectively not compatible with any other launcher, all right? If you're into Android customizations, one of like the main customizations you can make is swapping out your launcher. In fact, let's see if did I uninstall it? I guess I completely uninstalled it. You can still install aftermarket launchers on this device and run them, and you can even pretend that like you're setting it as a default, but unfortunately, every time you hit this home button, it's going to reset as default the stock Shanling launcher. And this is what it looks like. It's a very unfancy launcher. It's fine, it's clean, it's simple, but what I don't like about it is there's no like app drawer or anything like that to organize your apps. All of your apps just end up on the home screen, kind of like an iPhone situation, which iPhone thankfully got away from, and Android's has historically not had a problem like this, where all your apps just end up kind of being dumped on a home screen. But the launcher that they've chosen to be the default and the only launcher you are able to use on this device, unfortunately, that's what it's like. The other thing, and this is more nuanced, and this is probably more particular to me, but is actually a pretty big deal for me, is that because they have customized this home button, it's not a real home button, screen pinning doesn't work, okay? And if you're not familiar with what screen pinning is, let me do a quick demonstration, okay? Here is another audio player that I've got, and what I like to do is I don't like to enter my password every time I turn this thing on and off, right? But it is connected to my Google account. It's got some pretty sensitive stuff inside of it, so I do still want it to be secure, but I don't want to enter my password every time. There is a function in Android called screen pinning. So if I open up an app, go to this view and hit this little pin button, see down here, it tells me that the screen is pinned, okay? And basically what that means is that now the player is stuck in this app, I can't back out and like go hack my email or whatever. And it basically means that I don't need my password. I can just easily turn this thing on and off. I'll never have to leave this app. And it kind of becomes like a standalone music player with the Android stuff in the back. Now, if you want to get out of it, what you do is you press and hold these buttons, and it takes you to the lock screen where you enter your password, okay? The Shanling M6 Ultra, unfortunately, is not compatible with that. Because of these buttons, if I pin the screen, which I can, you can see I go down here to pin it. If I click that button, I won't be able to get out of this. In fact, should I do it? I'm afraid of doing it because the only way to get out of app pinning on this device is to reboot the system entirely, which is pretty disappointing. Again, is that a thing that affects everybody out there? Maybe not. Maybe that's just how I use Android DAPs, but unfortunately, those are some pretty real limitations that I find annoying. All right. Okay, so that's the main functionality stuff. Well, at least that's like the main Android functionality. Let's get into now a little bit more of the nitty gritty. We'll talk about the battery life on this player. The Shanling M6 Ultra is coming with a 5,600 milliamp hour battery, which is pretty big. If you're used to like phone batteries, like 4,500 milliamp hours is usually pretty big on a phone. 5,600 milliamps, pretty big on this. Unfortunately, in terms of battery life, it doesn't result in a ton of battery life. On single-ended connector, you get about 13 and a half hours, at least this is what it's rated. And on balanced, you get just 9 hours of playback. From my experience, I would say that the battery life is at least that good, if not maybe even a little bit better than what they claim, but it's still not gonna be like a battery life champ or anything like that. What is pretty notable though, is that the standby battery life on the M6 Ultra is actually pretty exemplary. And I think that's an underrated aspect of battery life with these DAPs. That just means like, if you put this to the side for 3 or 4 days, or even a week, when you come back to it, the battery won't have killed itself like a lot of other Android DAPs will. In fact, most of your battery will still be there. It's pretty impressive. And again, I think that's kind of an underrated aspect of battery life on these things. Okay, let's now just go ahead and dive into talking about the sound on the M6 Ultra, and I will warn you up front, I generally don't hear a lot of differences between audio players, okay? If you've come to this review because you want to know, does this audio player have a bigger sound stage or more detail retrieval versus some other audio player, you've come to the wrong channel, unfortunately. And in fact, I would say you're probably looking for the wrong thing, because I don't want to say it doesn't exist. I just want to say that I think most of these DAPs basically sound the same. That said, there are some differences, and we'll talk about them. All right, most obvious differences are going to be in things like power output. How much power, how loud can this get your hard drive headphones? I mentioned up front what the balanced output on this thing is. It's 720 milliwatts of power at 32 ohms, which is really, really quite a bit, especially in a portable source like this. On single-ended, it's just 240 milliwatts at 32 ohms, but honestly, everything I was listening to this, I ran on single-ended in low gain mode. That includes things like Sennheiser HD600. I've been testing a bunch of planar headphones lately. Everything I have, I was able to run on the least powerful output of this. So the fact that you can get 720 milliwatts of power out of the balance connector it's impressive. Is it useful? I don't know. Maybe the only time I would imagine needing that much power is when I was at like Can Jam and it was kind of loud and I was driving a lot of headphones. There it was maybe useful, but even then, I don't know. That's a lot of power. But if you're looking for a lot of power, you definitely got it here. Other things that are different in terms of sound between sources is output impedance, right? Output impedance is like an electrical measure of the output ports on the device. And I don't have tools for measuring it myself, but they claim that it is less than 1 ohms output impedance on both single-ended as well as the balance connector. I think I did that in reverse, but you get the gist. And less than 1 ohm of output impedance basically means it's not going to make any difference. And I'd say to my ear, I did not hear a difference. What output impedance can do, if you have a high output impedance on your source and you have a very sensitive earphone, especially things with like balanced armatures, you can actually hear audible distortions of the frequency response. It'll change the frequency response of an earphone. And fortunately here on the M6 Ultra, I don't hear anything like that. This just sounds to me like what it should sound like. The other big difference, and this is maybe the most significant difference that I hear between sources, is the noise floor, the sound floor, noise, hiss, different words to describe the same thing. Basically, if you plug in a sensitive earphone to this, do you hear just kind of like background hissing from the amplifiers inside of it? And what I'll say about this thing, this is the most silent source that I've heard, okay? Now, I've said similar things about some other DAPs that I've reviewed in the past, because what had been my standard, my testing methodology up until recently was that I used a Maga OC K5, was my most sensitive IM at the time. And that was an IM that I could plug into a lot of sources. I could really quickly hear if there was hiss or noise coming from the amplifiers in it. And it was an easy way for me to measure the differences between some sources by my ear. Unfortunately, the past couple of DAPs that I've used, the Maga OC K5, I mean, I don't want to say unfortunately, they're so silent that the Maga OC K5 is really not picking up anything. But I did find recently that I picked up this. This is the Campfire Audio Aura. And this is an insanely sensitive IM, probably more sensitive than it should be. But with the Aura, I can now go back to some of those sources that to me seemed dead silent with Maga OC K5 and actually figure out that there is a little bit of audible noise floor, again, depending on what you're connecting to it. In fact, even things like my Apple dongle, which I generally think of as like the cleanest, almost most pristine source out there, there's an audible noise floor that I can pick up with the Campfire Audio Aura that I couldn't with my other IEMs. And when I plug the Campfire Audio Aura into the Shanling M6, I hear nothing, okay? On single-ended especially, I will say that I don't want to say I can't hear any noise floor. There is just the faintest hint of some noise floor back there, but it's really, as far as I'm concerned, a completely silent source. When you switch over to a balanced connector, again, when you're listening to a highly sensitive IM like the Campfire Audio Aura, I would say that the noise floor is a little bit more audible, even here on the Shanling. But if you're listening to music, it's nothing at all that I'm concerned about. And again, it's still the most silent of all of the audio players that I tested it against. Yeah, honestly, it was frankly pretty impressive. But again, maybe even just to dive into a little bit more my testing methodology, what I do, and this is going to play into the next bit that we talk about. What I do is I plug in the Shanling M6, or not the Shanling, the Campfire Aura, and I have a test track that I've prepared called Sound Floor. sound4.flac. And basically what this is, and you can kind of see this represented in the waveform down here, is it's just silence interrupted periodically by a beep. And what that means is that I can hear the beep, I can confirm that it's playing music, like that it's playing a file, and that it's loud enough that I can hear it. But I know that if I hear anything in between the beeps, all of that noise will be coming from the source. And when I'm listening to the M6 Ultra again, I don't hear anything. It's dead silent. And that also plays into the next set of testing that I did, which is, so that's just like kind of testing the latent sound floor. Another thing that sometimes you have to contend with these Android DAPs is interference from either the Wi-Fi antennas inside of it or even the processor in it. And some other audio players I've used, if you're doing any processing, like you're running a streaming app or scrolling your screen really fast, sometimes that causes interference that can get picked up by the audio connector, or again, doing high Wi-Fi traffic. And fortunately here with the M6 Ultra, again, completely dead silent no matter what I did. I was running Geekbench tests on this thing, basically taxing the CPU as much as possible, running Wi-Fi speed tests on this thing, again, taxing it as much as possible, and none of it generated a peep out of the audio connector. So pretty excited about that. So that's going to be basically my main thoughts on this player. That's pretty much all I got to say about it, except that of course, we got to put it into context and talk about how it compares against a couple of other digital audio players. So I'm doing some 3-card Monty over here and moving in a couple of other audio players for us to take a look at. Let me turn these things on. And there we go. All right. So these are pretty different in terms of price range. They run the gamut, but and also a little bit different in terms of feature set, but we'll go through them one by one. So again, the Shanling M6 Ultra, $910, the most expensive one here on the table. The File M11 Plus, which is what I have over here, this one's $700. And then finally over here, we've got the Hibi R5 Generation 2. This is by far the cheapest on the table. I think it comes in at $450, almost half the price of this thing. What are the trade-offs? Okay, in terms of form factor stuff, I will say that the M6 Ultra is probably, I think, the most handsome of the bunch. Again, that's going to come up to your personal preferences, but I think the M6 Ultra is just a really gorgeous device. And I would say it also kind of fits into kind of a happy medium in terms of size. Oh, I should have made these things not turn their screens off. But yeah, it comes into like a happy medium of size. A little bit smaller than the M11 and a little bit bigger than this, and generally just fits pretty nice in the hand. I will also say that the M6 Ultra is the only one that has a volume knob. The other ones have volume buttons, and that's nice to have a volume knob. The audio jacks are on top. Again, as we talked about, that is the only one like that. If that's what you want, there's your pick. For me, I prefer having the audio jacks on the bottom, so a bit of a complaint for me. And then again, there are only 4.4 and 3.5 millimeter connectors on the M6 Ultra. Let's talk about the M11 Plus. This thing is a chonky boy. But generally, I don't know, it's definitely well built. It has a weird customizable button on it, which is the one thing that makes this thing a little bit different. I never used it. In fact, I never found a function or a use for it. So I don't know. But if you wanted to really customize your player, that does have a little bit of extra customizability. Still don't really get why. The audio jacks are on the bottom of the M11 Plus, like I like, and it does have the 2.5 millimeter connector, which I don't really care about, but if you do care about it, well, it's there. Anything else to talk about the form factor? I mean, I would say also, this one probably has the buttons I like the least. Over here on the right side, like the playback buttons are a little bit too flush with the device, and then the volume button is a little bit on the clacky side. And now finally, the Hibi R5 Gen 2. It is the most svelte and compact of the bunch, which I gotta be honest, I like. This is actually even larger than the previous Hibi R5, and I kind of liked even the smaller player a little bit better, but you know, some people definitely like the bigger screens. I get it. It's just not me. I like the smaller stuff, and I like that. I'll also say that I think that the Hibi R5 has probably the best buttons. They're just the easiest for me to discern. Even though there's no nubbin or anything on the play button, I find that this is, I don't know, I never get confused. And then, like I mentioned over here, you've got volume up and down buttons instead of a knob, which is maybe not quite as nice as the volume knob over there, but a fairly small trade-off, IMO. And then over here, of course, on the bottom is where we've got those audio jacks like I like it. And they've got 3.5 and then 2.5 and 4.4 millimeter balance. So those are kind of like the main differences in terms of the form factor. In terms of functionality, let's talk about how they compare. The Shanling M6 Ultra is the most powerful one here on the table. It also has the lowest noise floor, which is pretty impressive because a lot of the times that's kind of a trade-off, is that more power equals higher noise floor. And the M6 Ultra gives you both. It's basically, this is like the day walker. This is the vampire that can walk out in day. It has all of the benefits and none of the weaknesses, which is great. It's also got really fast performance with the Snapdragon 660, 3.5 gigs of RAM. Really no complaints in terms of the CPU firepower inside this device. Unfortunately, there are some pretty disappointing limitations with Android on it, unfortunately, which we talked about. And I will say that the battery life on this thing is also not super impressive. Again, it was like 13 hours or something like that on single-ended and 9 hours unbalanced. Not great, but it's not too much different over here on the File M11 Plus. I would say the power on this thing is also, again, more than I need. I think it was at 500 milliwatts versus this was 700 something milliwatts. So it's not quite as powerful, but again, it's more than what I need. And I would say that the noise performance on this thing is very, very good here on the M11 Plus. But in head-to-head comparison with the Shanling, it was a step behind. There was a noticeable bit more noise on the M11 when I was listening with the really hypersensitive Campfire Aura on the M11. Small quibble, not honestly, it would not be a purchasing decision for me, but if it is important for you, worth calling out. I'll say this thing also has the same Android 10 and the same Snapdragon 660, so all that same good processing firepower, which I love. And the M11 Plus has none of the goofy Android limitations, right? So you see, I've got this thing in my screen pin mode. I can exit screen pinning. I'm not going to show you my password, but this thing does let me install my own custom launcher, this is what I like to use. I like to use Niagara. This is how I like to set up my DAP, and I can do that here on the M11 Plus. Unfortunately, battery life is also not that great. It's about 14 hours claimed on single-ended, but it also has the benefit of having really good standby battery life like the Shanling does. And then finally, we'll talk here about the functionality on the Hibi R5 Gen 2. Again, this one's coming in at half the price. And this is where the functionality stuff is where there are some trade-offs, right? In terms of noise floor, this one has audibly the highest noise floor. I would say it's still on most IEMs that I try, dead silent. And again, for me, really not a big deal. But when you're listening to it head to head, it's very different. It's very obvious that the Shanling has the better noise performance. It also has the lowest volume capability. I think it was, I don't have the stat on hand right now, but the power output, especially on single-ended, is a little bit weak on this. But again, I'm listening to pretty much all my stuff on single-ended at low gain, and it's not a problem for me. I don't know who needs as much power as these things provide, but if you need it, the Hibi's probably not going to do it. I would say this thing's also got an older version of Android. It's Android 8.1, and it's got a pretty weak processor in it. It's a Snapdragon 425. It'll play streaming apps, but they definitely get chunky versus these two players, the Shanling and the Fio, can do streaming apps great. The Hibi, it struggles with them, and I don't really use streaming apps on it because of that, to be honest. The main standout feature though here with the Hibi is the battery life, right? It's got a weaker processor, it's got weaker amplifiers in it, but the trade-off is you get 30 hours of battery life, which on an Android device is frankly pretty standout. So I don't know, that's kind of a selling point for me on the Hibi, but if you're looking for the power output or the better noise performance, you might prefer the Fio or the Shanling. And I think that's about gonna do it for my thoughts here on the Shanling M6 Ultra. So I do have to give it a score. Out of 5 stars, I'm gonna give this thing a solid 3 stars. This is a very, very solid player. I love the build quality of the physical stuff in the hands. And when it comes to playing audio, arguably this is the best source that I've got, right? The lowest noise floor, the most power output, and it sounds good. But I feel like the other players that I've got are sufficient, right? The noise floor differences, not a big deal to me because Well, not because noise isn't a big deal to me, just that they're also good performers, just not as good a performer as the Shanling. And then power output, again, I can kind of get everything I need out of a lot less power than this thing has. Even pretty hard to drive headphones, so I'm not totally sure exactly why you need 720 milliwatts of power, but if you do need it, it is here. The Android limitations really do come down to, or end up being like the main reason that I'm not super enthused about this player. But if those things don't scare you off, if you're not worried about not being able to install a custom launcher, if you're just interested in using this thing as it is out of the box and you want the most silent player, it's not a bad option. And if you're interested in checking it out, I do have a link in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you found this review helpful, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, and join my Discord server where I'm spending way too much time hanging out, chatting with folks from the audio community, like we're about to here in the audio Q&A. Again, if you're not here live, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. But if you are here live, stick around and let's chat while I sip some tea.